Hello, everybody, and welcome to this fantastic event, the State of Vue. Before we actually start, as you may know, there is a few, we need to thank our sponsor, and our sponsors today is going to be Digital Labs. Digital Labs is your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. You can find out more at this.co or send us an email at this.co. Shameless plug as well. We are hiring, and as you can see, there's a team of fantastic people waiting for you. This was from our Halloween special, so we don't always wear dress like that for our event. And if you don't want to send us an email on the jobs at this.co for the way we look, you could send it for the kind of people that we work with. We're very, very happy to have this fantastic client, and we're happy to actually expand our team. Lastly, before we jump and introduce the panelists and the host and everything else, I would like to also share the next event that we have, where the React World Tour is happening in New York City. I cannot say the surname, but it's David Khorshid and Tracy Lee. Then we got the State of Accessibility in April, where there are experts in accessibility to discuss new innovation changes in accessibility. We got the Women in Tech monthly mentoring. That is a fantastic event that has been going on for quite a while now, where all women of all levels are allowed to come in to discuss about tech. And it's a fantastic event. It's really, really taking shape and growing internally. And finally, we got the State of React happening on the 26th of April. You can follow us on Twitter, on this.media, and therefore you will get all this information and make sure you don't miss anything. Big event today. We got loads of panelists. We got loads to discuss. I'm your host, Simone Cuomo. I'm a software architect at Digital Labs, if you don't know this yet. And with me, the one and only Ivan Yu, the creator of Vue.js and full-time open source contributor. So thank you for staying here, for coming around, Ivan, and for taking care of hosting this as well with me. I do need support, and no better support than you. We also get fantastic panelists today. We have Jessica, a software engineer for Cyprus. Thank you, Jessica, for being here. We have Vanessa, a front-end lead at Zavi. And then we got Charles, a developer advocate at Stripe. And finally, last but not least, we got Rowan, a software engineer at Wikimedia. I have not tried to say your surname, guys. I tried many times. It goes very wrong. Every and each of these panelists will have a chance to actually introduce itself now. I think I've done with all the talking, and I don't think people came here to actually listen to me. They actually came here to listen to you guys. The first and foremost, what I think we can do is, people know Evan. People don't need to know me, but they need to know you all. So why don't we go around the table and actually share your usage and your involvement with Vue, either in the community, in your current company. Maybe we can start. Are you okay to start with you, Vanessa?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I started with Vue pretty early. I can't even remember then, so it was years ago. And it was kind of because I missed the React Angular train as I was working in other projects. And then I was like, okay, there's Vue. And there was exactly one company I found in Munich that was doing this. And I want to try this. And I was therefore then very happy about the ease of use for the framework for prototyping and for these small widgets. And then people started to ask me, hey, there's this new thing called Vue. You know, in Germany, everything takes like 2 years longer to arrive. And can you talk about this? And this is how basically everything started. How I got involved with Vue and people asking me, hey, can you explain this? And I started very, very small, like this is a computed property and this is so cool, look how it works. And this is like on-click handler. And I never went another direction again. And I'm very happy now again to talk about Vue Free and Composition API again. And yes, in the new company I was working at, I, of course, decided to go exactly with Vue Free. I remember that I waited until September 2020 until the official release was there. And then I said, okay, now it's on. Vue Free it is.
Amazing. I like it. Thank you so much. Very nice to see your involvement. Next one up, Charles. Take the mic.
Yeah, totally. So I'm a developer advocate at Stripe. Let's see, when did I start with Vue? So I think, weirdly enough, I started with Vue when I was making a transition to kind of doing more front end work. And the project actually involved using Angular. And I thought that was all there was to front end development. And I actually didn't enjoy it a ton, but people told me that Vue was just like an excellent experience. So I tried it on one of my own projects, built something out. It was a ton of fun. And then, you know, with work and stuff, I ended up doing a lot of React stuff. But in my most recent role, this role as a developer advocate, I saw that there was this huge community, the Vue community, that was a little underserved in terms of the resources that we offer, the examples, the documentation, and things of that nature. So I hopped right back in. I got involved with one of our sponsor projects, which is Vue Stripe, gave a conference talk, stuff like that. And just generally, I've just been a part of the community and a consumer of mostly a consumer of Vue, you know, taking advantage of the great work that like Evan and some of the folks on this very panel have been putting out. So that's my experience with Vue.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Charles. Next one up, I'll go to Rohan. So Rohan, take the mic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rohan Katal. I'm a software engineer at the Pinia Foundation. And my coming to Vue story is not as interesting. We decided that we were going to use Vue at Wikimedia, and so I had to learn it because I got put on a team that is responsible for. I wanted to be put on a team, but I'm one of the people working on our Vue migration. So obviously, I had to learn Vue, and that's how I've come to it. And I'll speak more on this later. But I found it very interesting working on integrating Vue with our pretty old and legacy stack that we use at Wikimedia. And it's definitely refreshing to get to work with something much more modern than what we have been working with before.
Amazing. Last but not least, Jess.
Hey, Simon. Okay, so hi, my name is Jessica Sachs. I work at Cypress as a staff engineer and lead the team that develops the Cypress component test runner. My experience with Vue has been kind of in two phases. First, I came to it as a user 5 years ago. Oh my God. Shit, 5 years ago.
Time flies.
Oh my God. And then I started building dev tools for it when I was at my previous job and wound up getting hired at Cypress to build those dev tools for real. So I built a component test runner that lets you, test drive your component development, kind of like Storybook with a testing aspect. So that's currently my story with Vue. I flitter in around the ecosystem, mainly in Vite and Vitest at the moment. Yeah.
And we're surely going to talk about both of them. They're the hot potato of the community, I would say right now. Good. So, Evan.
Yeah.
What about you? Tell us, when did Vue actually start? Was it like after a night out of drinks, or was it a thought? Nice, was there a thought behind it? Tell us. Behind the scene of the Vue creation.
Honestly, I can't remember when exactly the idea started. I think it was probably one day, probably at work, when I got done with the project, and somehow I got this, like, the moment at work when I'm sitting at my desk and I had like no real work at hand. So I was like, maybe I'll just do some side project for fun. And so I was like, what could be fun? So I think I was probably working on a few projects that involved Angular 1 at that moment. And I was like, okay, like, why not just try to build something similar by myself, but using, some different techniques, maybe. It was mostly sort of trying to kill time, but also try to play with some new JavaScript features while building something that might be useful to myself in the future. And eventually it got into it. Yeah, it remained a side project for quite a long time. Actually, I think at least like 5 to 6 months before I turned it into, started thinking about, okay, how do I like maybe publish this as an actual project instead of just something in a random folder.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's, I think, I hope I'm not the only one who was curious about that. So this, as people may know, the state of Vue, what we do in these meetings is try to discuss as much as we can about the community and share our insight to things that happen, and share our insight as user of Vue, the Vue ecosystem, the Vue framework itself. And the first question I would have, as we know, Vue went in, had a lot of changes in the past year, a lot of things Swift. So the first one I would probably say is, and I'll call Vanessa in for this, is the change of Vuex to Pinia. So what is your take into the change there? What do you think as a user, and also take the mic on the state management.
Yeah. So I remember when I started Vue 3 with a completely new greenfield project, everything was small and simple, and I wasn't completely sure, is Vuex already ready, but I also don't need it. And I found out that is with the composition API and with a composable, I can simply also just use a reactive object and boom, I have state already. And I think it was already explained in the Vue 3 docs that it's a pattern to create state very easily using a reactive or ref. Okay, so what happens if it got a bit bigger? And I was searching on the internet, is Vuex still the thing for Vue 3? And then I stumbled over Pinia. Although Pinia is not there since Vue 3, it's older actually. I think it's there for 2 years and was created with Vue 2 already. And I think the helpful thing is that I stumbled over it via Twitter. And I also remember a similar topic, tweet of Evan that, hey, for VS Code, just use this IDE extension now. And I was like, okay, I use this now. And it was a bit similar with Pinia, as I heard Kia telling, yeah, Pinia is kind of Vuex 5, just use this. And with that, I was already kind of sold for that, because if someone like the core contributors tell me what to do, I can trust on this. And this is how I then decided, okay, let's try out Pinia and see how it works and see how it feels. And what I always liked, and I think the whole community always liked about Vue, is here the same thing again. Pinia is like this first-party library of a Vue core contributor. It's not something from a third party that might lack in the real connection to the real framework. And with Pinia, it was like, it didn't even feel similar to Vuex, but it didn't really feel, again, like I would even use a different library. I just imported Pinia and used it similar to composables. And what I did stumble over was that it doesn't have mutations anymore. And I was like, feels weird after like 5 years of Vuex. And therefore, afterwards, I sent out a tweet. Hey, people, how are you feeling? What is your problem with mutations? And I found out a lot of people really dislike mutations. I wasn't even aware of that. So for a lot of people who are closely working with Vue, I think it's just Pinia. So what I also did today was to ask kind of the others, hey, what would you do if I start a new Vue project today? And I tried to also ask outside of my Twitter bubble, where everybody is like a Vue fan. And there I can see that it's a bit different, because there's this fear of, hey, this is just this one person maintaining it, and is this going good? And then I read here and there, Evan, I think you and some other people said, hey, it's like Vuex 5, it's just not really migrated yet. So maybe you have some more details about this.
Yeah. So pretty much like what we said publicly a few times now. So Pinia is de facto Vuex 5. It's really just a matter of naming. So I think so the history was basically Kia and Eduardo and me, we were discussing, so we had internal RFCs on what Vuex 5 should look like quite a while back. So I had some really rough drafts, like in the Discord chat. Then I believe Kia started working on some RFC drafts internally, and then Eduardo was like, "Okay, I like this. I'm just gonna run with it," and he started basically coding it out, and then he gave it a name and started using it, and then and he liked it, so he added documentation, worked out SSR integrations. He worked out DevTool integration with so when Guillaume, who works on the DevTools, added support, allowing to, so they work together to basically design the Vue DevTools plugin system so that Pinia can add its own events into the DevTools timeline. So it all kind of worked out, basically filled all the pieces that Vuex had, and to the point where we realized, okay, like this is pretty much what we wanted for Vuex 5. So we actually had an internal discussion on whether we should just rename it to Vuex 5, but eventually we decided that we want to keep the Pinia name because Eduardo invested a lot of time. Basically, Pinia is all his efforts, and he came up with the name, he came up with the logo, and it already had, like even before we made it the official recommendation, a lot of people are already using it. So renaming it will probably create, the potential confusion, because when you search for Vuex on Google, right? Right now, you get either Vuex 3 or Vuex 4, which have largely the same API, and it has mutations. But Pinia has slightly different API. So if we rename it to Vuex 5, then you have the similar problem when you search for Vuex, but you have to tell, okay, whether is this page about Vuex 5 or 4, But with Pinia, it's very clear. Everything about Pinia is about Pinia. So there are multiple factors at play. So we eventually decided to just keep the name. So if you are a user and you're having the concerns about, okay, is Pinia going to be around? Will there be a Vuex 5 that replaces Pinia, so I have to migrate again? That's not going to happen because Pinia is pretty much Vuex 5. So we're not going to say release Vuex 5 in a few months and say, okay, everybody using Pinia, now you should migrate. That's not going to happen.
Are we gonna put up a little banner at the top of the doc site of Vuex 5? Maybe with little pineapples saying please now migrate.
I think Eduardo explains this in the Pinia docs, but maybe we should. We made it pretty clear on the new docs as well. Maybe we need something on the. Yeah, maybe we need something on the current Vuex docs, Vuex 4.
I also think that we cannot be a bit loud enough with that, because I searched for some articles and I'm in this bubble of everybody of you and hearing, okay, use this. And I'm like, okay, I listen. But what I read were arguments that were kind of hard to argue with, that it felt like, hey, use Pinia because it's so cool and it's so lightweight, and they still use this 1 kilobyte thing. And then it got a weird turn to, oh, but you have a more complex application. Yeah, maybe stick to Vuex.
Interesting. I feel like that. I feel like for TypeScript users, they immediately understand exactly why Pinia exists. And that was one of the biggest design decisions, right, Evan? Was for TypeScript users, doing it in Vuex was it was a non-starter. It was actually one of the reasons, so Cypress, where I work, Cypress, had a big moment in September or August. We have been rewriting Cypress for the last year or so, mainly in GraphQL, Vite, and Vue, and we're so type strict, and Vuex versus Pinia was a decision maker for Cypress on if they were going to use Vue. So for TypeScript users, Vuex just does not work. I would go around to everybody in the company, mostly React users, right, and be like, Vue, what are your problems with it? Would you have a problem learning it? Blah blah blah. and everybody was like, I tried Vuex with TypeScript. No.
Okay.
And this is like a year plus ago before Pinia. And so, it came back around. I was like, what about this? What about this Pinia thing? And they're like, oh, yeah, okay. And so now we use Vue, and it's been going really well.
Nice. That's good to know.
Yeah, we can talk about this sometime.
Another selling point. I like that, to be able to drive people there. Good. Anyone else would like to add anything else about state management? And Rowan, what is the Wikimedia thoughts on?
We use Vuex for some things. We haven't built a ton of things in Vue yet, so not all of them are complex enough to need Vuex, but some of the bigger apps are. And we just recently migrated from Vuex 3 to Vuex 4 for that, and thankfully that migration is pretty simple because the API is almost exactly the same, especially across it's a little bit complicated across like the Vue 2 to Vue 3 migration, but it's simple enough that with like 10 lines of code, I could write a wrapper that abstracted away all the only API difference. And that allowed us to have a smooth migration. So I'm already reading as you guys are talking, I'm already reading the Pinia documentation and looking at how similar the APIs are and seeing how well I will be able to get away with this, like swapping out Vuex 4 for Pinia and hopefully making our existing Vuex 4/even 3 code still work and not notice. But that's the main thing that I'm interested in at this point. But we also just migrated to Vuex 4, so we'll see. As you're about to learn when I talk about my agenda item, you'll see that convenience of migration is a big factor for us because we just have so much code in disparate places that and we're like doing this live in production the whole time incrementally. So we do need migrations to be very simple and backwards compatible, or we need to build additional layers on top to make them that way. Because any migration guide that says like, and then you just search and replace all of your code and replace X with Y, I'm like, no, we are not doing that. I'm going to write a wrapper that allows you to use X that pretends that it's Y, because otherwise we have too many different repositories. It's going to be too difficult.
Interesting. It's good to know, it would be interesting to see if there's any nice case studies or documentation of people that did a big migration, not a small, but a proper big migration, because that's usually what drives the wheel and help people get through. We touched any more on the state management, guys, or do you think we should move on to the next one? I think it's no. Any more charts? No? I think we touched upon it just slightly. You touched it, Jessica. TypeScript. So as you know, Vue 3, the big things of Vue 3 is that it allowed people to actually use TypeScript with Vue. It was much more TypeScript friendly. So that's a big change for the community, because the community that have not used TypeScript, because again, Vue 2 was not extremely TypeScript friendly. So what are your feelings, guys? What have you heard about, around on the community? What is the adoption of TypeScript? And do you think that moving forward, that will take precedent moving forward? I don't know who wants to take over.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about this one. So for my projects, I have not, for what I've been working on lately, I have not used TypeScript. That being said, I had a kind of a podcast type talk about Vue and the ecosystem, similar to this, about a month ago. And we asked the audience, we were like, how many of you are using TypeScript in your projects? And literally everyone's trying to use TypeScript at this point. So it definitely is, I would say, kind of like a killer app of Vue 3 and a reason why tons of people would migrate. It's just, it's just really important to a lot of people. It gives their editors superpowers, what have you, right? So I think it's incredibly important, I'd say. Although I haven't used it, I think the community at large is very thankful that it gels well with Vue 3. That's just my experience.
Anyone else want to talk? Vanessa, you go.
Yeah. So in my experience, suddenly everybody started to use TypeScript. And everybody beforehand wanted to try out TypeScript, but there was this fear of how is this really working. And I think it's very understandable if you don't do it in your daily job. how would you do it and learn TypeScript really at side projects on the weekend? So I think you have to exercise daily a bit to really learn something new. And then Vue 3 came out, and I think also Vue Mastery and Vue School immediately had some courses explaining, okay, look, and there was also this doc somewhere on the Vue 3 docs, this page, which is explaining, hey, you have to write it a bit differently with the defined props and defined emits, and this is how it looks. And yeah, as I said, suddenly it exploded that people slightly started to get TypeScript in. And what was really funny or really lovely too was in projects I was working with or I heard from, that the whole team was like, yeah, but is it worth it? What's the learning curve? How slow would you probably get? But all the front-end devs were like, no, like really like, no, we are doing this now. We want this. We will be quicker. And of course, I absolutely do love it if I can just type the object and I can see all of the auto methods or functions I can use on these objects. So everybody I know of is just Vue 3 and TypeScript in different kinds of how deep they get in it. Some people are just like, okay, I get my objects from an API and from the backend, and I want to use this. And some others are getting more into it and using enums and unions and intersections and everything else. But everything is, I think, valid and fine.
Yeah, I learned on the job TypeScript and Vue and React at the same time. So I didn't have a side project. And I would say that working in Vue and TypeScript is extremely easy because you don't usually have to import a lot of the element types. You do a little bit in the events, like when you need to cast things as like from a particular native DOM event, like you need to actually import, like I'm using an HTML input element or something. But other than that, a lot of the types Vue figures out for you, and then the IntelliSense powered by Velar is awesome. It's really awesome. It works in the template tag, and it works across components. And I'm constantly blown away. It gets better and better and better. And when people, like experienced TypeScript users, have concerns about adopting Vue, again, like when I did my little poll of like Vue and TypeScript in 2020 versus my poll in 2021, I would get on Zoom and screen share with people, and we'd be clicking through the template and messing up props and making sure that it correctly, caught rename errors, type errors, and stuff like that, and just demoing it. And it's gotten so much better so quickly. Huge shout out to the maintainer of the project, Johnson Chu, for his work on that. As far as define emits and define props, if people are unfamiliar with TypeScript or very new to it, in Vue, I find TypeScript in the SFC files actually doesn't show up that much. It's converting a project, to your point, Rowan, is extremely easy to go from JavaScript Vue SFC files to TypeScript Vue SFC files. Especially now in Vue 3, because you're using the same define emits and define props syntax if you're using script setup, which I think we'll talk about a little later. So I find that migration's really easy from JavaScript onto TypeScript in Vue SFC files, and then also the support is just awesome. Yeah. Ronan, are you using?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we use, I was about to jump in actually, Jess. We do use TypeScript. We don't use script setup at the moment because last we looked at it, we found the define props and define emits syntax too ugly to want to work with it. But things like the define props, especially like the way that you have to, like if you have props that are like not required and have default values, we looked at the syntax and like, but also the regular props syntax just works. I think that is also better supported by Volar, which the critical thing that we found that let us use that in our repo is that there's a utility called Vue TSC, which is essentially a command line version of Volar. And recently, they also added the ability to generate type definitions for Vue files as well. So that means that we can now publish a library that has type definitions for its components that you can then use. And most of the things work. There's a few things that you don't get, like typing of like slot parameters doesn't work.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of things does. And that's been really great. Honestly, the only pain point that we've had with that is that Vue TSC and Vue test utils work together pretty well, but there are some edge cases there where they don't. I need to like actually investigate this and write up the bug, I think, against Vue test utils, because there's some annoying stuff that happens if you try to like throw typed Vue wrappers around the place. Which I owe you right up now because I said this.
Yeah, you can. We can talk after this. We were just messing around with types because Cypress component testing wraps Vue test utils, and we use way too much TypeScript in this.
Yeah, there's. I can talk for an hour about all the stuff that happens with TypeScript and tests specifically.
You should do.
But in components, it has been super valuable in components as well. And for me, what was a little bit more difficult to find, because it looks like a third-party solution, but what was really important to us is having that command line tool so that our CI can verify the things that our IDEs see, because we can't, like, we didn't feel like we could say like, okay, well, you have to use this particular IDE, and when you submit a code contribution, we can't verify that it passes these stricter TypeScript checks without loading in its RDOs. No, this has to run in CI, and with Vue TSC, it does that, and that's wonderful.
So I want to acknowledge like the great work by Johnson on Volar and Vue TSC, because pretty much V3's TypeScript story would not be complete if we didn't have, this level of template expression, type checking, and all that. So speaking of this, I actually started sponsoring Johnson for him to work full-time on Volar for a couple months. So that's he is currently working on it full-time. He actually came up with this himself. He was like, hey, I have a plan. I want to do this and that, improve this and that. So I believe Vue TSC now works with watch mode. So you can actually use Vite with Vite plugin checker, which allows you to essentially run the main build transform in one thread and then run type checking on your components in another thread from the command line, if you need that, that is. If you are fine with having everything done by the IDE, that's also cool. But yeah, for some people, they really like having type checking running in the command line at the same time. So now that is possible. And Johnson is adding a lot of new stuff to Volar, also refactoring the internals of the language service. His main goal is essentially, because he told me that he felt the initial code when he worked on the version was a bit of I guess he thinks the code is messy, so he wants to refactor it to a point where other people can start contributing to Volar and Vue TSC as well. So I think that's a great effort. And so if you haven't, you should follow him on Twitter. I think his ID is Johnson Codes HK. But he's just working on a lot of great stuff recently. So definitely big props to him for bringing up Vue's TypeScript story on par with other frameworks. So on the other hand, like Rowan mentioned, there are still some areas that we know it's lacking. For example, slots. It's a challenging part because it's a cross-component thing, and also there are certain cases where you can pass slots either via TSX or template. So there are a lot of edge cases we need to consider on how to make this really work in all cases. And there's also
it does work for us, by the way.
It works to some extent.
Yeah, it works. Our experience is that it works within the same repo, but not across repos.
Yeah,
because
it's done with Volar special handling. Basically, Volar knows these are two Vue files in the same project. It tries to mash them, but it's not done like other things because most of the IDE support is done by leveraging TS language server, but slots is like a custom mechanism, right? There is no like easy thing that we can leverage in TypeScript to do that. And then there is generics for components. Carlos has on our team actually has been doing a bunch of explorations. The thing is, the way Vue components are defined is we need to find a good place for people to place generics for components. That's the main challenge. Like there are already ways for you to define generic Vue components, but it's usually quite verbose. But maybe if like we have a few like options that we can think of right now, or we may come up with something special for Volar so you can write it more easily. But the bottom line is it's technically possible. We're just looking for a more ergonomic way for users to actually define it. Yeah, so that is the pretty much about TypeScript. So I also want to reckon that the idea about the code you write in JavaScript versus TypeScript when using composition API specifically is very similar. Most of the time, the code will just work without using much explicit type annotations, which was an explicit goal when we designed the API. So I'm glad to see that as working out well.
Amazing. And that's great because, you know, this meeting is actually for that, is to highlight what we've done and make sure that we actually fulfill the needs of the community. So, sorry, live event. Then, you know, the next question that we're going to move up is something that we touched upon a couple of times during the call, and is script API, composition API. It's been a big change from Vue 2 to Vue 3. There's been a big talk before it was Vue 3. Loads of people started to adopt it in Vue 2. What is your saying on that? If you create a new component, guys, do you go as use the script setup as your default, or do you still use the option API? So who wants to take the mic? And what are your thoughts as well about the community?
I can grab it. But first I have a question. Evan, did you I feel like when you released script setup, it was just sugar. Did you actually intend for this to be the main way to write Vue components?
I secretly hoped it would, and I think after, so that was the actual goal, but we didn't want to position it as such on initial announcement because
force people to do it. Yeah,
you know, like the community is always allergic to this sort of now it's a big change, rewrite. It's very easy to take this kind of change as it's time to rewrite everything, right? So we need to be kind of careful with the messaging. We want people to switch voluntarily by discovering, this is actually a better, not necessarily better, but we actually like this, so we switch, not because they told us to switch, so we have to switch,
Yeah.
So we always try to do that with this sort of, whenever we introduce a new way of doing things, it's always this sort of challenge because when people are forced to change their code and they don't see the immediate benefit, it's always going to leave people sort of angry or concerned. But when they do this, because they discover, this actually improves my development experience, that's a completely different story.
Yeah. I love it. I didn't think I would like it when you released it. I didn't think I would like it at all. And I think, so I work with one of the other Vue test utils maintainers. His name is Lachlan Miller. And Lachlan and I kind of clash in our code styles. So when we code review each other's PRs, he's always he likes to explicitly, he doesn't like destructuring is a good example. He doesn't like not knowing where a value comes from. And so things that are short and have brevity. Like, that's not his style. He likes long names, very explicit. I'm like really love destructuring. I like short names that are implicit. And so when it came to script setup, it was very similar. It was like he likes the, he doesn't like to save characters. That's an anti-goal of his. And so module exports with the defined component wrapper at the top there, he was like, this is great. Why do we need script setup? And I was like, let's try it. And so we tried it a little bit, one PR here or there. And we just both like it. It's just so good and so satisfying to write that we just started writing everywhere. And I think we have like probably 6 components that also need to export a public API, like with types. So when we keep our types next to our, let's say we have like a little status badge, right, that has like a type for info, alert, warning, right? We'll export that in the public block above. And even that, which is like kind of the ugliest version of script setup, is just so satisfying and pretty to write. Yeah, I like that you can export const in the public one. So if you just do, so if you just do like the script lang as TS or whatever, and you're like export type, like that's just public. Or export const inherit adders is true. Like you can just do that. You don't have to export a giant object. I love it so much, and I didn't think I would. So thank you for letting me discover that on my own.
Yeah. When we went through the RFC, there's it's a lot of back and forth because we had the initial version where everything is an export.
Yeah.
And we removed the exports, basically changed it to sort of like function-like scoping. A lot of people were like, oh, this is no longer explicit. I want everything to be I want to explicit export part of it and then keep other parts not exposed to the template. But it's kind of like a mental switch that people can get over with Options API because like when you work with Options API, it's like, oh, everything I declare is exposed to the template. But suddenly when you change it to script setup, some people like they're really concerned about some component properties being exposed to the template by default. And yeah, it came up over and over again during the RFC discussions. And I had to essentially explain like this is like the new behavior is pretty much like function scoping. Like when you declare everything here and then you declare a function inside a function, right? That inner function.
What
is the inner function?
We lost it. We lost him to the command W.
We lost him.
I'm betting. Yeah, I remember that RFC. I like.
It was a big RFC.
I totally forgot about it until Evan just mentioned it, and I was like, that's where Lachlan and I first.
That RFC and the composition API were big, like properly, like hundreds and hundreds of reply. Vanessa, I know that you took your mic, you unmuted yourself, so probably you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, because I'm so excited. Because I in 2019, I think I tried Svelte to see how that how you write this and how it feels, and I'm like, oh, this is nice. And then Vue 3 came out, and of course my heart was with Vue 3, so I decided to in favor for Vue 3 and against Svelte to use in a new project. And then I also stumbled over this script setup syntactic sugar, and I'm like, I'm all in. This is what I want. I also am not that big fan of destructuring, but in a different way, as I had to write import, define component, export, I was like, nah, that's not duplicated. But on the other hand, I realized it's really also where you are coming from, because then I saw the community was like, no, don't do this. I don't want a composition API, and I really don't want to have a script syntactic sugar. And then I remember that years ago, 5 years, as we realize today, Vue was so great because it was also, the structure was making understandable what's going on if you're also new to that topic. And this is your data, this is reactive, these are computer props, and these are methods. And it was kind of structured and sorted, especially if you work on really UI components. Maybe that's a thing that can be easier. I'm more and more getting to this JavaScript side of the front end, and therefore I enjoy how crisp and short you can do everything with script setup. But I think it was a good choice to not say, okay, this is the right way to do, but to say you kind of have this free options. You use the options API, or you use options composition API, but with setup, or you use script setup. What feels best for your project?
Evan, everyone was waiting for the sentence to finish. So go ahead. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on this.
Yeah. My computer somehow just suddenly locked me out. But I want to, regarding script setup, there's just one thing that Rowan mentioned. They found defined props with default values to be super cumbersome. So we actually have, so there's this upcoming experimental thing called reactive transform. It's still experimental, but the idea is we can essentially getting to the territory where we bend the semantics of JavaScript a little bit. For example, when you destructure define props, like technically it should not be reactive because you destructured it. But with reactivity transform, you can just destructure it and the props will still be reactive. And you can even destructure with default values, and those default values will just compile into correct props default values. So everything kind of just works by using the destructure and default value syntax. And it's type safe. So the downside is you're now doing something, technically it doesn't work with vanilla JavaScript, but the compiler magic makes it work. And the other side of it is like the ref sugar, which we went through back and forth over. Maybe it's like the 4th or 5th iteration now, but I think we finally arrived at something that we addressed most of the problems that we discovered during those previous iterations. Some people probably still don't like it, but still it's completely opt-in. But if you turn it on, then you can essentially enable this sort of assignment-based reactivity where you no longer need to use dot value for refs everywhere. You can basically declare a variable and explicitly say, okay, this is a reactive variable, so when I reassign it, it should trigger changes, right? So this is, interestingly, this is I know a lot of people will be having a pause here. They're like, wait a second, this is not how JavaScript works. And this is exactly my reaction when I first saw Rich Harris came up with the svelte syntax. That's like more than 2 years ago. He actually came up with that syntax after me, Dan, Rich Harris, and Dan Abramov, and a few other people. We actually met physically in New York. That was like before COVID. And the night before they announced React hooks, interestingly. And then after that, Rich came up with this idea. So that was the start of Svelte 3. And my initial reaction to that was like, okay, this is not how JavaScript works. And Svelte is doing really great. A lot of people like it. So there are some. So this is why I'm always open to just explore this kind of possibilities, and which is why I think reactivity transform may be improving the ergonomics of composition API further for people who are okay with this sort of tiny semantic mismatch. But in return, you get a more, basically, it's a pragmatic approach to saying, okay, like this syntax doesn't do anything in actual JavaScript, so why not use it as an opportunity to improve the ergonomics of the code that I write? So we'll see how it goes. I mean, I personally think it's promising, especially with the props destructure. I think even if you don't like assignment-based reactivity, you'll probably still like the destructure reactivity for defined props, because that really addresses one of the current pain points of defined props.
Yeah, we do use. We also use VPress in our component library for the documentation with some of our own stuff that we hacked up to try to make it replace Storybook as much as we could, and I'm glad we did because it's so much faster than Storybook. Storybook is so slow, but in VPress, there's a feature where in Markdown files you can use script setup to then be able to use Vue things inside of your Markdown, and that has been wonderful. Anything where you don't have to define a complex thing of props, I do love script setup. But we did also decide that in our library we wanted to have a consistent style from component to component, and so we decided that composition API but without script setup was the most appropriate thing to use as our default. The other thing that goes in that too is that Vue DocGen doesn't really understand script setup very well yet. It doesn't even understand the composition API that well, honestly, because every time we have a public method in a component, we have to define it with the options API, or Vue DocGen just doesn't realize that it's there. And you can you can expose it. You can put a JS doc comment above it. It has an @public tag. Doesn't matter. If it's not in the methods block, it doesn't know that it's there. So that's also a bug that I now need to write up and file because I talked about it in public.
This is really funny. The other person on my team is the maintainer of Vue DocGen API. So you've now filed bugs against two people I work with today.
Now, I'm starting to feel that it's not a coincidence that Rowan is doing on purpose. He says on there, question for Jess, and he's going through that.
You're doing stuff that is so similar to the design goals of Cypress component testing, which is like, how do you make? I'm just really interested in your usage of VPress. That's really smart.
I dropped a link in our private chat earlier, but we should also talk after this because we probably have some things to talk about.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Well, I think we can stay on the same conversation. And, we know that this is all about, we know that Vue is an open source project. Lots of people try to contribute there, but is there anyone, and I do know that there is some. So I want to give the mic to Rowan and Jess and anyone else that want to pick the mic on sharing open source project in which you know that people can contribute, that you want to share the usage of Vue, and just add a couple of, see a few things in there. So Rowan, do you want to take the mic and tell us how, I know you covered it already quite a bit, but do you want to tell us more about?
Yeah, I'll try to tell you as briefly as possible what we're all doing at Wikimedia because it's a lot. So we began with a bunch of different teams sort of working independently from each other, writing things in Vue 2, and that was kind of chaotic. And then in a very similar thing to what I think either Jess or Vanessa said something earlier about how they started a project in like September or October of 2020. And so they could use Vue 3 because it was just barely out then. That's what we did. No, I think we started in 2021, excuse me. I'm going to get the timeline wrong, but we started a sort of unified component library to try to unify all these sort of independent efforts that had emerged throughout our organization. We started then in Vue 3, and then we were like, oops, I guess we have to migrate our live site from Vue 2 to Vue 3, or at least to the Vue 3 migration build in order to be able to use this. So that's what we did. I wrote wrappers that paper over the API incompatibilities that did exist between Vue 2 and Vue 3 because the migration build failed to cover a few things. But then we were able to run with some minimal updates for like some code was using very internal undocumented things in Vue 2 and it obviously broke. But for the most part, we were able to migrate the live site over. And right now, if you go to Wikipedia, it runs on the Vue 3 migration build still because we have a lot of code in obscure corners that we have to migrate. Simona has actually been working with us and has been very helpful in getting the unit tests migrated over because there were another thing that we had to figure out how to do is if your code runs against the compatibility build and some of it is Vue 3 code and some of it is Vue 2 code, how do your tests even work? And it turns out that is possible. Thanks to thanks to Simona's one-liner, I was able to get us have the test passing against Vue 3 in some repos that were not using Vue 3 yet. So that's been good. We've also been having fun with having our component library be written in Vue 3 and being used by code that is written in Vue 2. And that turns out to also be possible if you use the migration build and do the right compat config thingies. As I said, we use VPress for our component documentation, and we came up with some things that might be worth eventually turning into a real Storybook alternative-like thing, but for now, are just our internal thing. Well, I mean, it's open source, so you can look at it, but we're not trying to make a separate upstreaming at this point in time. That allows you to demo components, and that's still being developed. We're looking into, I saw that Evan was potentially going to talk about Petite Vue maybe, and we're also thinking about our next step forward, which is we want to be doing some sort of server-side rendering approach as well. And that's going to be really tricky because our backend is still in PHP. And that's because Wikipedia is old. And our approaches to front-end coding were developed mostly in 2009 and 2010, and that was before Webpack existed. And Webpack didn't exist because Node.js barely existed. So a lot of our stuff is just old. We're not running Node.js for almost anything that we serve on the web. So I'm working on figuring out how we're going to arrange this awkward marriage of PHP and Node.js to try and make some sort of server-side rendering thing work. And we've also been looking at Petite Vue as a possible alternative / faster bypass for figuring that out and getting progressive enhancement of some things working with that. And that's the whole brain dump. I dropped a link in our private chat earlier that maybe Simona can duplicate to the public one, but we have a component library that we're developing. It's still very much under development, not ready for usage or much external contribution really, but it gives you an idea of what you can do with VPress for demoing a component library. So I'm dropping that link in. And that's probably as much word vomit as I can sustain. But if anyone has questions, I would love to hear them, and otherwise we can hear from other people.
We got 3 minutes left, so let's go through. And I know that there's a few more things that we mentioned we want to discuss. So Jess, you want to?
Sure.
More?
Yeah. So I guess as far as projects to contribute and also interesting things that are happening in Vue and Vite, there is vtest, which is the new test runner that some of the Vue core team members have and Vite core members have put together. It reuses your Vite build configuration and is the only test runner aside from Cypress that supports ES modules natively. So I would say if you're starting a new project and trying to, if you're starting a new Vite-based project, you should be using vtest or Cypress or both. And I would say that there's, as far as the community goes, and if you want to have fun and come contribute, I highly suggest going to, chat.vtest.dev, join the Discord, and there is so much activity happening in that project. Come hang out. They have a UI. So if you like component level work, UI work, you can do that. And then also, if you flutter around in the Vue ecosystem projects, if you see something in the Vue ecosystem that's still on Jest, probably, and what I've done, I think I did Vue uses conversion. Feel free to start converting the tests to vtest. Like, you know, hop in the Discord, make sure you like talk to a maintainer first before you spend all the time. But yeah, if you want to contribute, switching over the tests to vtest is a fun and easy way to get familiar with the tool. You'll also see just how easy the migration is. I did hundreds of tests in Vue use, which isn't a code base I'm that familiar with, in 2 days, and it just worked. It was fucking cool. Anyway, that's my plug for vtest.
Yes, I can see VTest appearing soon on the default standards on the Vue documentation, probably for the next state of Vue.
It is. It is.
Oh,
Yeah. There's VTest and
quick.
Cypress are the two recommendations. So if you're starting a new project, if you go to VTest docs as well, the recommendation is that if you're doing anything headless, so if you're writing any logicful code, you should use VTest 100%. And then if you're doing anything headed, you might want to use Cypress so that you can actually see what's going on. But either one of them, both of them, are in the docs.
Thank you for the distinction there. I think someone also wrote it there, so it will be useful for people. I'm sharing all the links that you're going to do. Sharing in the private chat as well, so just so you know, I've watched the access to them. The time of the meeting is up. So maybe just a very quick run through, and I'll go from Charles all the way up and then finish with Ivan on just, I don't know, how do you want to finish this off? Anything else do you want to add, share, shameless plug, or we can just pass through?
Yeah, sure. If we're doing shameless plugs, absolutely. My favorite type of plugs. So shameless plug, there's really, if you happen to do Stripe integrations with Vue, there's a really awesome project called Vue Stripe. It's owned by a maintainer named Joff Tiquez in Manila. He's looking for maintainers to help him with looking for contributors to help him with the migration to Vue 3. There's also a really cool project called Swerve. It's kind of like Stale While Revalidate, which is I think owned by Vercel. It's like the Vue version. It's a pretty cool library. They have some issues that are open. If you're interested in contributing to a pretty cool and fast growing project, look at that one as well. That's me. I'll pass it over.
That was a long shameless plug. Next one. Very short. We're out of time before we get kicked out. I don't know, probably my wife.
Okay, then
Vanessa, you go next.
Yeah. I hope we see us all in June in Amsterdam. At least I'm in Amsterdam. I won't make the way to US. It's so far away. And in September, 22nd of September, there's actually the first Vue.js conference in Berlin, Germany. And I'm very excited after COVID to actually see people in person. And I will be moderating the whole day.
Amazing. Next one is Jess down on the screen. I think
yeah, sure. Shameless plug would be for Cypress component testing. I built it. I'm a little biased. Yeah, come play with it. Also, VueConf US and Vue Amsterdam, both in June, first and second weekends. They're actually hopefully happening. Seems possible. That's it. Rowan?
No direct plugs, but thank you all for giving me. I took a lot of notes, and now I have probably 5 feature requests to file, and I have some emails to send and some other things to look into. So y'all have given me probably enough work to spend my Friday doing follow-ups for this. So I appreciate that very much. It's been great being able to share my work, but also just hear what is going on in the ecosystem.
Last but not least, you go take the show, Evan.
Cool. Yeah. So for Swerve, there's also, I believe, so in React community, there's SWR and also React query, right? I think there's also an equivalent Vue query for composition API. So if you've checked out Swerve, you may also want to check out Vue query. I haven't personally compared the two in details, but I think it's worth mentioning because there are similar equivalence options. Yeah, and other than that, so just a brief update, because the past month, I pretty much took some time off after launching the docs. But the next steps for Vue on the higher level would be start working on 2.7, and then there is 3.3 lined up. So 3.3, we have a bunch of things in the list, and which will include probably include reactivity transform shipping as an actual feature. And I mean, it's already shipped. You can turn it on right now if you want to, but it's just 3.3 might mark it getting out of experimental. And further down the line, we have some experiments going on about a an alternative render mode for Vue. So I'm just teasing it a little bit here, but the idea is it's a non-virtual DOM compile output format that has still similar code output size, but drastically more efficient memory usage and performance. To think it's inspired by Solid, which is another new interesting framework out there. So so we were always learning from the great ideas coming out of the community and see how we can improve Vue on that front. So this new alternative rendering mode is very, very early, but I got a prototype working. Still, this is like something that's really further down the line. But if it works out well, I hope we can do it in a way that you can embed it into a current existing Vue 3 project without disrupting the rest of your components. So it's like opt in at the component scope, or you can sort of maybe compile one single component using that mode, and then you can ship really lightweight web components or one-off components with it. So that is something we'll probably look at in the next second half of this year. Yeah.
I'll finish it off by saying thank you to all of you guys. We had so many more questions to go through, but it's nice to have discussion, open new feature requests in Rowan's perspective, and actually have a chat with each other that we all use, are involved in Vue. And again, thank you so much, Evan, as well, for joining in. For the people that are watching, we go 24 hours time zone covered in this call. We go from 5 o'clock in the morning to probably midnight. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you for watching.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.